So today we're going to spend some time looking at community ecosystems. The framework that I'm going to introduce here is one that will allow you to sort through all the data that you've been collecting, all the information you have about what's going on in the environment around the idea you want to focus on. And I call it a community ecosystem as a way to begin to differentiate between a single look and recognizing the interaction of what's going on with all the pieces. So let's get started. So the best way to approach this ecosystem model is to make sure that you've already done some observations in the community of the population you want to serve. And even better, if you can get input from the people that you are hoping to be your potential clients or customers. It's a descriptive tool. It helps frame an understanding not only for yourself, but it allows you to explain your understanding and actually give rationale for where your focus is so that other people can join in that understanding. And it's really flexible. It looks like it's very structured, but in fact, it gives you the capacity to be able to modify it and engage with the information that you have in some different kinds of ways. And finally, I'm going to talk about how you have to adapt it to each different kind of community that you're working with. So most of the time when people think about their environments, they think about forces. They think about things that are pushing on community conditions. So this is a more traditional look at what might be going on in a community, an ecosystem. So there's history and there's economic conditions, there's healthcare system practices, people are making personal choices, there's neighborhood characteristics. If you were to do this in Detroit, you would obviously be spending time describing how many empty lots there are. But to be able to deal with all this information all at the same time can be very confusing, and it makes it hard to figure out where you want to focus. So the community ecosystem allows you a different kind of look at all the information you've collected. The core to this is you start with the person. You start with the person that you want to serve, whose life you want to impact, the people that you believe are the focus of your new idea. In any given community, that person is always surrounded by a family. Now, this may be a traditional family, it may be a group of people they consider a family. So don't get caught up too much in using the words explicitly, but think about these as being the people that they would constantly be engaged with on a daily basis or have a long life kind of connection to. The next part of this community mapping is a neighborhood. These are still informal relationships. These are people that live close to one another or have an affinity relationship with one another. These are people who, if you had a problem at midnight, you could walk over and knock on the door and they would answer the door. If you watch the news coverage of a fire, these are the people who call because they saw their neighbor's house on fire. So that's the neighborhood. The local associations and services part of the ecosystem are those economic and social institutions that help make the framework for the community work. So it might be the church on the corner, it might be the local school building, people in the local school, it might be the grocery store or the drugstore, or those kinds of institutions where neighbors gather, where the support that individuals need happen. The next part of it is the intervening agencies. These are places that address the toughest issues where professionals need to provide the service. And finally, the outer ring is the government policy area. These are the areas that set the rules that will actually help all parts of each of these rings be able to interact with one another or not, depending on what those policies are. So government policies play a big role. And finally, public will. Not having an open door and an encouragement to address the issue you're working on because the public supports it is very different than if there's no public will. and that you have to fight and change that attitude. So this mapping tool, here's how it might look applied to a particular kind of issue. Let's just say that the issue that you're working on is the lack of school success by people in a particular neighborhood. So you may start mapping those kinds of resources. You might begin to realize that many of the people you want to reach have ADD. They have particular individual challenges that are blocking their ability to be successful in school. And so what are the characteristics of those individuals that you want to serve becomes the question. It might be that the family situation in that neighborhood is predominantly single parents. Understanding the family structure and putting it here in relation to this individual person is a way to help collect and sort the information you have. In the neighborhood, if there's an active neighborhood organization, there may be a number of people who have been identified as sort of the block house, the grandma on the block, that are part of the neighborhood support network. So it's a little more formal than it might be otherwise, and they can be resources for the family. Another one might be that in the association in the neighborhood, there's a really strong YMCA that's just 6 blocks away. It has a vibrant part of that neighborhood and has a strong role to play. It could also be in the neighborhood some negatives. There's a high crime rate, and so understanding that and its influence on the family and the individual becomes really important. There's only one church, so the families may end up going to churches all over the community rather than to the church that's in the local neighborhood. There's a CD treatment center pretty close. That may or may not be helpful. It could be a strong resource for the family, but it could be a negative one. And a government policy that it might influence this is actually they close the park. And so suddenly a resource that was supportive of this individual person in the family no longer is available. So the whole purpose of this mapping tool is to give you a geographic and interrelationship capacity to be able to log in what you know about what's going on in the neighborhood. Now, the mapping tool itself reflects reality. As you remember, I worked at St. John's University. At that university, we had a strong partnership with the monastery right adjacent to the university. The people in that monastery would create their community image completely differently. While the monk is still in the middle, the person is still in the middle, their family, the way that they would have described those people they engage with daily, are the people that live in the monastery. They see the church as their neighborhood, and in fact their family relationship is the farther outside their sphere of connections. So if they were facing an individual challenge, they would first go to others in the monastery, maybe seek help from the bigger church, maybe seek help from people in the parish, and then go reach their family. So I point this out to you to help you realize its flexibility in this tool, but also to know that it's important for you to spend time with the person that you're trying to focus on to understand the spheres of influence in their own environment. So here's another one that was done by a colleague of mine at United Way in Nova Scotia. This person spent a lot of time working with Native American populations, and in his assessment, there is no individual in the Native communities that he was working with in Nova Scotia. It always was family. So an individual was not singled out and separated. The family was worked with, the family shared all of the challenges that each individual faced. The second is that the Native nation was their resource and was their neighborhood, and then the service agencies, et cetera, et cetera. So again, another example of how you really need to pay attention to the ecology and the ecosystem around the individuals you're trying to serve. This tool can also help you identify potential community resources that you might want to partner with. So let me just give you a couple examples of that. Let's just again go back to the school success concept and look at where those institutions are that might be of help. So institutions that might be focused on helping the individual who has the ADD, remember? It could be that it's the teachers that you would spend programming time working with. It could be that in the family situation, the family also may end up wanting to work with the teachers, and that between the person and the family and the teacher, you have a program solution that will work. It could be that the employer of the family that exists in the community, the employer may actually be a resource you can draw in, and maybe you're doing after work parenting education about how to cope with ADD kinds of children. It could be that the school system is a pretty effective school system, and the school system is a resource you need to think about. And so you begin to see in this that all of these different elements can be called on to help you package what it is that you want to do. Oftentimes what happens is people end up selecting a couple different strategies. So they might have a direct strategy, they might have a school system strategy, and they may actually have a neighborhood association strategy as well, so that the neighbors all know that and have a better understanding about how an ADD child might act out in a given environment. So just to add to complexity and also to introduce you to the capacity of this ecosystem tool, you can begin to take information about 3 or 4 different issues and map it together. When I worked at United Way in the Minneapolis area, we would do this often. We would look at the issues facing poverty and the individual and working our way out to government policy rules about poverty, and put that adjacent to their experience with health issues. It would help us begin to identify where the overlap was. It also would help us begin to know maybe where we should start. Maybe we don't want to start at strategies to reduce poverty, but in fact we may choose to start on a health issue that's limiting people's capability of being able to carry on full-time jobs. So again, it's a way to organize the information you have. It's not going to necessarily point to the solutions, but it's going to point actually where you want to start. So as you begin to look at the work you've been doing on your own issue area, the question that I want you to think about is, how would you map the information that you have? What information do you know about each of the parts of this ecosystem? What else do you need to find out? And how does your map start framing the place that you want to start? So we'll talk more about this in class. Please do come to class ready to talk about your own topic area and begin to tell others what you're beginning to think about the key pieces are of the community ecosystem for you. See you in class.